I lost my child while giving birth. The room fell into silence, and my family turned their backs on me. They said, "God punished you." My chest hurt more than the pain in my body, but the doctor looked at them, his hands trembling. He said, "No, it was her husband who signed the papers that cost the baby's life." And then, he almost took his own life. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can become your greatest tormentors, until the truth sets you free in the most unexpected way. It was a Tuesday morning when my phone rang. 6 months had passed since that horrible day at the hospital, 6 months since I buried my daughter Emma, 6 months since my own family had abandoned me in my darkest hour. The caller ID showed St. Mary's Hospital, and my heart immediately started racing. Why would they be calling me now? "Mrs. Henderson?" The voice was shaky and certain. "This is Dr. Martinez. We need to talk. There's been a development regarding your case. Can you come in today?" I hadn't heard from Dr. Martinez since the day after Emma died. He had been the attending physician during my emergency C-section, the one who had to deliver the devastating news. But there was something different in his voice now, something urgent, almost desperate. "What kind of development?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't discuss this over the phone. But Sarah, please come in. And bring your family if you can." Bring my family? The same family that had looked me in the eye and told me God was punishing me for my sins? The same people who had whispered behind my back at Emma's funeral, saying I must have done something terrible to deserve such tragedy? Let me take you back to the beginning to understand how we got here. I met my husband David when I was 23. He was charming, successful, came from what everyone called a good Christian family. His mother, Margaret, was the kind of woman who quoted scripture at every family dinner and made sure everyone knew how blessed their family was. When David and I got married 3 years later, I thought I was joining a loving family. Margaret welcomed me with open arms, at least on the surface. She would say things like, "David deserves a godly wife," and "I pray you'll give us grandchildren soon." At the time, I thought it was sweet. I didn't realize it was a test. We tried for 2 years to get pregnant. 2 long years of negative tests, failed treatments, and mounting pressure from Margaret. "Maybe you're not right with God," she would say. "Children are a blessing for the faithful." David would just nod along, never defending me, never telling his mother to back off. When I finally got pregnant with Emma, you'd think the family would be overjoyed. And they were, but with conditions. Margaret took over everything, the baby shower, the nursery decorating, even choosing the hospital. "This baby is too precious to leave anything to chance," she'd say, shooting meaningful looks at me. David became even more distant during the pregnancy. He'd spend long hours at work, claiming he needed to provide for his family. But I noticed the phone calls that would make him step outside, the way he'd quickly close his laptop when I walked into the room. When I asked about it, he'd get defensive. "I'm working, Sarah. Someone has to think about our future." The pregnancy wasn't easy. I had complications early on, bleeding, severe morning sickness that landed me in the hospital twice. Each time, Margaret would shake her head and mutter something about God's plan, and how some women just aren't meant to carry children easily. Dr. Martinez was wonderful through all of this. He was patient, kind, and always made sure I understood every aspect of my care. "You're doing great, Sarah," he'd say during our appointments. "These complications aren't your fault. Sometimes pregnancies are just difficult." But at 36 weeks, everything went wrong. I woke up that morning with severe abdominal pain. David was already gone, another early morning at the office, he'd said. I called him, crying, telling him something was wrong. "I'm sure it's nothing," he said. "You've been worried about everything this whole pregnancy. Just rest." But the pain got worse. I called Margaret, hoping she might drive me to the hospital. "Are you sure you're not just being dramatic?" she asked. First-time mothers always panic over nothing. Finally, I called my sister Jenny, who lived an hour away. She dropped everything and raced over. One look at me and she knew. "We're going to the hospital. Now." The drive to St. Mary's was a blur of pain and fear. Jenny held my hand and kept saying, "It's going to be okay, Sarah. Everything's going to be okay." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. When we arrived at the emergency room, Dr. Martinez took one look at me and his face went pale. We need to get her to surgery immediately, he told the nurses. Call the husband. Now. What happened next? I only learned about later. David arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after I'd been rushed into surgery. But he didn't come alone. Margaret was with him, and she immediately started taking charge of the situation. Dr. Martinez pulled David aside to explain what was happening. The placenta had separated from the uterine wall, a placental abruption. It was life-threatening for both me and the baby. They needed to perform an emergency C-section immediately, but there were risks. Significant risks. This is where the story gets complicated, where the truth that would destroy my family lay hidden for 6 months. Dr. Martinez explained to David that there were 2 approaches they could take. The first was immediate surgery with a full team, which gave both me and the baby the best chance of survival, but it was expensive and not fully covered by our insurance. The second was a more conservative approach, waiting to see if the situation stabilized, using a smaller surgical team, which was fully covered but carried higher risks. What do you recommend, doctor? David asked. The immediate surgery, absolutely. Every minute we wait increases the danger. David looked at Margaret, who was standing right there listening to everything. She shook her head slightly. David, honey, she said, you need to think about your future, about the family's finances. God's will cannot be changed by expensive procedures. But the baby, David started. If God wants this baby to live, he will make it happen regardless of which option you choose. But he also expects us to be wise stewards of our resources. Dr. Martinez stared at them both in disbelief. Sir, I'm strongly advising the immediate procedure. The cost difference isn't worth the risk. David looked torn for a moment. Then Margaret put her hand on his shoulder. Trust in the Lord, son. He knows what's best. David signed the papers for the conservative approach. I don't remember much about the surgery itself. I was unconscious when they finally took me to the operating room, 45 minutes after I'd arrived at the hospital. 45 crucial minutes that had been spent on paperwork and insurance authorizations while my daughter's life hung in the balance. When I woke up, the silence told me everything I needed to know. No baby crying. No excited voices. Just the steady beep of machines and the smell of antiseptic. Dr. Martinez was sitting beside my bed, his eyes red. Sarah, I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. But Emma didn't make it. Emma. We had chosen her name together just 2 weeks earlier. David had said it was perfect, that his grandmother would have loved it. Where is she? I whispered. Where's my baby? She's with the nurses. Would you like to see her? I nodded, unable to speak. When they brought Emma to me, she was so tiny, so perfect. Her little fingers, her button nose. She looked like she was sleeping, like she might wake up any second and cry for her mommy. I held her for hours. David came in eventually, his eyes dry, his mother right behind him. Margaret took one look at me, holding Emma, and shook her head. This is God's will, she said. We have to accept it. God's will. I looked up at her, still holding my daughter's lifeless body. This is God's will. Sometimes God takes the innocent to spare them from a sinful world, Margaret continued, her voice cold and clinical. Perhaps this baby was too pure for the life she would have had. David just stood there, saying nothing. Not comforting me, not grieving with me. Just standing there. That's when my sister Jenny arrived with my parents. The room was crowded now, filled with people who should have been supporting me, but instead felt like strangers. Jenny took one look at the scene and immediately came to my side. Oh, Sarah, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I'm so sorry. My parents were crying too. But David's family, they stood there like statues. Margaret even checked her watch, as if she had somewhere more important to be. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat. I need to discuss the medical details with you if that's okay. To help you understand what happened. That's when Margaret spoke up with the words that would haunt me for months. Doctor, we're a family of faith. We don't need medical explanations. God punished Sarah for something, and we have to accept his judgment. The room went silent. Even Dr. Martinez looked shocked. Excuse me, he said. This baby died for a reason, Margaret continued. Sarah must have done something to displease the Lord. Perhaps she wasn't faithful enough, wasn't pure enough. God doesn't take babies from good Christian women without cause. I stared at her in disbelief. You think I kill my baby? You think God took Emma because I'm a bad person? I think God's ways are mysterious, but not random, Margaret replied. Maybe you need to examine your heart, Sarah. Maybe you need to repent for whatever brought this judgment upon your family. David's father nodded in agreement. We should pray for Sarah's soul, he said. Clearly, she needs spiritual guidance. My parents looked horrified. Jenny stood up, her face flushed with anger. How dare you, she said to Margaret. How dare you blame Sarah for this tragedy? We're not blaming her, Margaret replied calmly. We're trying to help her understand God's message. That's when I completely broke down. Not just from grief, but from the crushing weight of being blamed for my daughter's death by the people who were supposed to love and support me. I sobbed until I could barely breathe, clutching Emma's tiny body while my husband's family stood there telling me it was my fault. Dr. Martinez looked like he wanted to say something, but David quickly ushered his parents out of the room. We should let Sarah rest, he said. This has been traumatic for everyone. Traumatic for everyone. I had just lost my baby, and he was worried about everyone's feelings. Emma's funeral was 3 days later. 3 days during which David barely spoke to me, during which Margaret organized everything without consulting me, during which I felt like a ghost in my own life. The service was held at Margaret's church, the same church where David and I had been married. The same church where I had prayed every Sunday for a healthy baby. The pastor, who had known the family for decades, gave a sermon about God's mysterious ways and the importance of accepting divine will. He didn't mention Emma by name. He talked about this precious soul and God's plan, but never once said my daughter's name. It was like she was just a lesson, a teaching moment, not a real person who had been loved and wanted. I sat in the front row, holding David's hand, but feeling completely alone. Behind me, I could hear the whispers. Margaret hadn't been subtle about sharing her theory that this was somehow my fault. The church community, these people I had considered friends, were now looking at me like I was cursed. After the service, people offered their condolences, but the words felt hollow. God needed another angel, they'd say. She's in a better place. But their eyes held judgment, not sympathy. Margaret had done her work well. The graveside service was small, just immediate family and a few close friends. As they lowered Emma's tiny casket into the ground, I felt like I was being buried with her. David squeezed my hand, but it felt mechanical, obligatory. That evening, back at our house, both families gathered for dinner. It should have been a time to share memories of Emma, to grieve together, to support each other. Instead, it became an intervention. Margaret stood up in my living room, in front of everyone, and announced, "We need to talk about moving forward. Sarah needs to accept responsibility for what happened and find a path to redemption." Responsibility for what? My sister Jenny demanded. Sarah didn't do anything wrong. The baby died, Margaret said simply. Good Christian women don't lose babies unless God is sending a message. That's not how medicine works, my father said, his voice tight with controlled anger. That's not how anything works. Are you questioning God's will? David's father asked. The room erupted into arguments. My family defending me, David's family insisting that I needed to search my heart and repent for whatever sins had caused this tragedy. And David just sat there, silent, watching his wife get torn apart by his own mother. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my legs shaking, and screamed, "Get out! All of you, get out!" Everyone stopped arguing and stared at me. "You think I kill my baby?" I said, my voice raw from crying. "You think I'm some kind of monster who brought God's wrath down on an innocent child? Then get out of my house. Get out and never come back." Margaret drew herself up to her full height. "Sarah, you're clearly not thinking straight. Grief has made you irrational. We're trying to help you find peace." Peace! I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to help me find peace by telling me I'm a murderer? By saying my daughter died because I'm evil? We're saying you need to examine your conscience, Margaret replied. Clearly, there's something in your past. Some sin, some failure of faith. Shut up! I screamed. Just shut up! The room went silent again. Then Margaret shook her head sadly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This anger, this refusal to accept responsibility. Sarah, Until you can humble yourself before God and admit whatever you've done wrong, you'll never find peace. She gathered her purse and headed for the door. David's father followed her. At the doorway, Margaret turned back one more time. David, your wife needs help. Professional help and spiritual help. Until she gets it, I'm not sure she's fit to be part of this family. And then they left. David looked at me for a long moment, then got up and followed his parents outside. I could hear them talking on the front porch, but I couldn't make out the words. My family stayed with me that night, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't understand how David could let his mother treat me this way. Honestly, neither did I. The next few months were the darkest of my life. David became increasingly distant, spending even more time at work, coming home late, barely speaking to me. When I tried to talk to him about his mother's accusations, he'd just say, "Mom's just trying to help. She's grieving too. She's grieving." I'd ask, "She's grieving by calling me a murderer?" "She never called you a murderer, Sarah. You're being dramatic." Dramatic. That became his favorite word to describe my pain. When I cried, I was being dramatic. When I asked why he wasn't offending me to his family, I was being dramatic. When I begged him to go to counseling with me, I was being dramatic. The church community largely sided with Margaret. After all, she'd been a pillar of that church for 30 years. I was just the daughter-in-law who'd lost a baby and was apparently handling it poorly. Invitations to church functions stopped coming. Friends stopped calling. I became a pariah in my own community. My own family was wonderful, but they lived far away and had their own lives. Jenny called every day. My parents visited when they could, but I was essentially alone in a marriage that felt more like a prison sentence. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chun, who specialized in grief counseling. She was the first person in months who didn't make me feel crazy for being devastated by my daughter's death. "Sarah," she said during one of our sessions, "what you're experiencing is called disenfranchised grief. It's what happens when society tells you that your grief is invalid or that you're grieving wrong." "But what if they're right?" I asked. "What if I did do something wrong? What if Emma died because I wasn't good enough?" Dr. Chin leaned forward. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You did not cause your baby's death. Placental abruption is a medical emergency that can happen to anyone, regardless of how good a person they are or how strong their faith is. It's a tragic medical condition, not divine punishment. Then why do I feel so guilty? Because the people who should be supporting you are instead blaming you. That's not your fault either. Through therapy, I started to understand that my grief was normal, that my anger was justified, that I wasn't going crazy. But understanding it didn't make living with it any easier, especially when I was surrounded by people who thought I was being dramatic. David and I barely spoke anymore. He slept in the guest room, claiming that my crying kept him awake. When I asked about trying to have another baby eventually, he said, "Maybe we should wait until you're more stable." More stable. As if grieving my dead daughter made me unstable. The worst part was the silence about Emma. David never mentioned her name. There were no pictures of her displayed in our house. Her nursery, which we had decorated so carefully, was shut up like a tomb. It was as if Emma had never existed, as if my pregnancy had been a dream. But I remembered. I remembered every detail of carrying her, every kick, every hiccup, every moment of joy when I imagined our life together. I remembered her tiny, perfect face, her delicate fingers, the way she felt in my arms during those precious hours at the hospital. Margaret's prediction came true in a way. I did become isolated from David's family. But it wasn't because God was punishing me. It was because they had made their judgment about who was to blame, and they weren't interested in facts or compassion or the possibility that sometimes terrible things just happen to good people. Which brings me back to that Tuesday morning, 6 months after Emma's death, when Dr. Martinez called me to come to the hospital. I had been avoiding St. Mary's since Emma's funeral. Driving past it made me sick to my stomach. The idea of walking back into that building where I'd lost everything felt impossible. But there was something in Dr. Martinez's voice that I couldn't ignore. I called Jenny first. "The doctor wants to meet with me," I told her. "He says there's been a development." "What kind of development?" "I don't know. But Jenny," he sounded scared. "I'm coming with you," she said immediately. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You're not facing this alone. I thought about calling David, but what was the point? He'd probably just tell me I was being dramatic again. Instead, I called Dr. Chun, my therapist. Sarah, are you okay? She asked. You sound shaken. Dr. Martinez called. From the hospital. He wants to see me about Emma's case. Do you have support? Someone to go with you? Jenny's coming. Good. And Sarah, whatever this is about, remember that you are not responsible for what happened to Emma. That hasn't changed. Jenny picked me up 2 hours later. The drive to St. Mary's was silent except for the radio playing softly in the background. I watched the familiar streets go by, remembering the last time I'd made this journey, in labor and pain, full of hope that I'd be coming home with my baby. Are you ready for this? Jenny asked as we pulled into the hospital parking lot. I don't think I'll ever be ready, I said. But I need to know. Dr. Martinez was waiting for us in his office. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 6 months. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were shaking slightly as he gestured for us to sit down. Sarah, he began, then stopped. He took a deep breath and tried again. Sarah, I owe you an apology. A huge, life-changing apology. My heart started racing. What do you mean? He pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. 6 months ago, when you came in with a placental abruption, I made a recommendation to your husband about the surgical approach. Do you remember me explaining the situation to you afterward? I shook my head. I was unconscious during most of the decision-making. David handled everything. Dr. Martinez's face crumpled. That's what I was afraid of. He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Sarah, I recommended immediate surgery with a full surgical team. It was expensive, not fully covered by insurance, but it gave both you and Emma the best chance of survival. Okay, I said slowly, not understanding where this was going. Your husband chose the conservative approach instead. Against my strong medical advice, he opted for the delayed surgery with a smaller team because it was fully covered by insurance. The room started spinning. What are you saying? I'm saying that the 45-minute delay in getting you to surgery, the delay that cost Emma her life, wasn't due to your medical condition being untreatable. It was due to your husband choosing the cheaper option despite my warnings. Jenny grabbed my hand. I couldn't breathe. But that's not all, Dr. Martinez continued, his voice breaking. I've been carrying this guilt for 6 months, thinking I should have pushed harder, should have overruled his decision somehow. But yesterday, something happened that made me realize I need to tell you the whole truth. He pulled out another document. Your husband's insurance company contacted me. They're launching an investigation into potential insurance fraud. It seems David has been claiming that I recommended the conservative approach, that it was the medically sound decision, in order to file a malpractice lawsuit against the hospital. My blood turned to ice. He's suing for malpractice. He's been working with a lawyer for months, claiming that I was negligent, that I made the wrong call that led to Emma's death. He's seeking damages for medical malpractice resulting in wrongful death. I stared at him in disbelief. But you just said he chose the cheaper option against your advice. Exactly. And I have documentation to prove it. Detailed notes from our conversation, the signed consent forms where he specifically chose the conservative approach, everything. Dr. Martinez pulled out a tape recorder. Sarah, I need to tell you something else. After what happened with Emma, I started recording all my conversations with families facing difficult decisions. It's not common practice, but after losing your daughter, I couldn't bear the thought of another miscommunication. He pressed play. David's voice filled the room. Doctor, my wife has always been careless with money. She doesn't understand that we can't just spend whatever we want on medical procedures. What's the cheapest option that still gives us a reasonable chance? Dr. Martinez's voice. Mr. Henderson, I need to be very clear. The conservative approach carries significant risks. I strongly recommend the immediate surgery. Margaret's voice, clear as day. David, honey, you need to think about your future. About the family's finances. God's will cannot be changed by expensive procedures. David, you're right, Mom. Doctor, we'll go with the conservative approach. But I want it on record that you're telling us this is medically sound. Dr. Martinez, sir, I'm not saying it's medically sound. I'm saying it's an option, but not the one I recommend. David, but it's an acceptable medical option? Dr. Martinez, with significant increased risks that I strongly advise against. David, but still acceptable? Dr. Martinez, with clear reluctance. Yes, it's an option. The recording stopped. The room was dead silent. Jenny was the first to speak. Oh my God, Sarah. Oh my God. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew about Emma's death, everything my husband and his family had made me believe about my own guilt, was a lie. Sarah, Dr. Martinez said gently, your husband has been telling his lawyer, and apparently his family, that I recommended the conservative approach. He's been building a case that portrays himself as a grieving father who trusted his doctor, only to lose his child due to medical negligence. While telling me it was God's punishment for my sins, I whispered. What? Jenny explained about Margaret's accusations, about the months of blame and isolation, about how the family had convinced the entire church community that I was somehow responsible for Emma's death. Dr. Martinez looked physically sick. Sarah, I am so sorry. If I had known what they were putting you through. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Because until yesterday, I thought this was just a family dealing with grief in an unhealthy way. I had no idea your husband was actively pursuing a lawsuit while letting his family blame you. The insurance company's call yesterday made me realize that David has been systematically lying about what happened in order to build his legal case. He pulled out more documents. There's something else. In his lawsuit, David claims that you were an unfit mother, that your anxiety and emotional instability during the pregnancy contributed to the complications. I felt like I'd been slapped. He said that, according to his lawyer, you were hysterical and demanding throughout the pregnancy, putting unnecessary stress on the medical team and compromising the standard of care. Jenny stood up, pacing. This is unbelievable. He's not just letting his mother blame Sarah. He's actively building a legal case that paints her as the problem. Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. And he's seeking a substantial financial settlement. According to the insurance investigation, he's claiming damages for loss of future earnings. Apparently, he's arguing that his career has suffered because of the stress of losing a child due to medical malpractice. I laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. His career. He got a promotion 3 months ago. His boss sent flowers and told him how impressed they were with his dedication during such a difficult time. Sarah, Dr. Martinez said carefully, there's one more thing you need to know. In his deposition, David stated that you had been talking about divorce before Emma's death, that the marriage was already in trouble, and that losing the baby was just the final straw. That's not true, I said. We had problems, but I never talked about divorce. I was focused on having a healthy baby. I know, but he's using these false claims to suggest that any emotional distress he's experienced is due to medical malpractice, not marital problems. The picture was becoming clear, and it was uglier than anything I could have imagined. David hadn't just chosen the cheaper medical option that cost Emma her life. He hadn't just allowed his family to blame me for her death. He was actively profiting from her death while painting me as an unfit mother and unstable wife. What happens now? I asked. Dr. Martinez looked at me with something that might have been hope. Now you have choices. The insurance company wants to depose you as part of their investigation. They need your side of the story to defend against David's claims. And if I tell them the truth, then David's lawsuit falls apart. The recording I just played for you, combined with your testimony about what really happened in your marriage, would expose his entire case as fraudulent. Jenny sat back down beside me. Sarah, you have to do this. Not just for yourself, but because what David is doing is wrong on every level. I thought about the past 6 months. The isolation, the blame, the crushing weight of believing I had somehow caused my daughter's death. The nights I'd lain awake wondering what sin I'd committed that was so terrible God would take my baby as punishment. The way David's family had turned the entire church community against me, while David silently collected evidence for a lawsuit that painted me as the villain. There's something else, Dr. Martinez said quietly. The insurance company's investigation revealed that David has been seeing a lawyer about this case since 2 weeks after Emma's death. 2 weeks. Emma had been dead for 2 weeks when David started building a case to profit from her death, while his mother convinced everyone it was my fault. I'll do the deposition, I said. I didn't tell David about my meeting with Dr. Martinez. I needed time to process what I'd learned, to figure out how to handle this revelation. But David made the decision for me. That evening, he came home from work with flowers, the first flowers he brought me since Emma's funeral. "Sarah," he said, setting them on the kitchen counter, "I think we need to talk." I looked at the flowers, cheap grocery store carnations, still in their plastic wrapper, and felt nothing but disgust. "About what?" I asked. "About us. About moving forward." He sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for me to join him. "I know these past few months have been hard." "Hard?" I interrupted. "David, your mother has spent 6 months telling everyone that Emma died because God was punishing me for my sins." He sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "Mom's old-fashioned. She processes grief differently than we do. She processes grief by blaming the mother for the baby's death." "Sarah, you're being dramatic again. Mom never blamed you. She just thinks that sometimes God's plan is hard to understand." I stared at him. Even now, even after everything, he was gaslighting me. "David," I said carefully, "do you think Emma's death was my fault?" He was quiet for a long moment. I think you could have handled the pregnancy better. You were stressed all the time, worried about everything. Maybe that contributed to the complications." There it was. He did blame me. "And the surgery?" I asked. "Do you think Dr. Martinez made the right call?" David's expression shifted slightly. "Actually, that's part of what I wanted to talk to you about. I've been working with a lawyer." "I know." He looked surprised. "You know." "I know about the lawsuit, David. I know about the malpractice claims. I know about everything." His face went pale. "How do you know about that?" "Dr. Martinez called me today. The insurance company is investigating your claims." David stood up abruptly. "You want to see him? Why would you do that without telling me?" "Because my husband has been lying to me for 6 months while his family tortures me with guilt over our daughter's death." "Sarah, you don't understand. I understand that you chose the cheaper surgical option against Dr. Martinez's advice. I understand that you're now suing him for malpractice while claiming he recommended that option. I understand that in your lawsuit, you're calling me an unfit mother and claiming our marriage was already in trouble." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Sarah, it's not. It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" "Because it seems pretty simple to me. You made a choice that cost Emma her life, and now you're trying to profit from her death while everyone blames me for it." "That's not what happened," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then what did happen, David? Tell me your version." He sat back down, running his hands through his hair. Our insurance wouldn't have covered the expensive option. We would have been financially ruined. So you chose money over Emma's life. I chose our future. What good would it have done to bankrupt us if the baby died anyway? If the baby died anyway? I stared at him in disbelief. You were already assuming Emma would die? The doctor said there were risks either way. He said there were significant risks with the cheaper option, and that he strongly advised against it. David was quiet. "And now you're suing him for following your wishes?" "It's not that simple, Sarah. The lawyer says we have a good case." "Based on lies, David. Your entire case is based on lies." He stood up again, pacing now. "Look, what's done is done. Emma is gone either way. At least this way, we can get some financial compensation for what we've been through." I felt like I was seeing my husband clearly for the first time in our entire marriage. "Financial compensation? David, we're talking about our daughter's life. And we can't bring her back. But we can make sure her death wasn't meaningless. Her death wasn't meaningless because she was our child and we loved her. Not because you can make money off her. Sarah, be practical. This lawsuit could set us up for life. We could buy a bigger house, travel, maybe even adopt." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop talking." We stared at each other across the kitchen. The cheap flowers wilted on the counter between us. "Your mother has spent 6 months convincing everyone I know that Emma died because I'm a sinner," I said slowly. "She's isolated me from my community, made me doubt my own worth as a person, convinced me that I somehow killed my own baby. And you let her do it. Sarah, you let her do it because it was convenient for your lawsuit. If everyone thinks I'm an unfit mother, it supports your claim that the medical team was dealing with a difficult, unstable patient." David's face was red now. "That's not. You're twisting everything." "Am I?" Because Dr. Martinez has recordings, David. Recordings of you choosing the cheaper option against his medical advice. Recordings of your mother telling you that God's will can't be changed by expensive procedures. Recordings of you asking him to say it was medically sound even after he told you he strongly advised against it. David went completely white. He recorded us. He recorded you lying, David. He recorded you prioritizing money over Emma's life. And now he's turning those recordings over to the insurance company to stop your fraudulent lawsuit. David slumped into his chair like a deflated balloon. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up at me. What do you want me to do, Sarah? The lawyer says we can still win if. I want you to stop, I said. I want you to drop the lawsuit, tell your mother the truth, and start taking responsibility for what happened. I can't do that. Why not? Because, he struggled for words. Because if I admit that I chose the cheaper option, everyone will know that Emma died because of my decision. There it was. The truth, finally. Everyone already knows Emma died because of someone's decision, I said quietly. Your mother has made sure they all think it was mine. David put his head in his hands. Sarah, you don't understand the pressure I was under. Mom kept saying we needed to be practical, that throwing money at a problem wouldn't change God's will. So you listened to your mother instead of the doctor? I thought if it was really that dangerous, he would have refused to do the cheaper option. He tried to refuse, David. You pressured him into it. We sat in silence for a few more minutes. Then David looked up at me with something that might have been desperation. What if we split the settlement? He asked. When we win the lawsuit, we split it 50-50. You can donate your half to charity or something if it makes you feel better. I stared at him. Even now, even after being caught in his lies, he was still thinking about the money. David, I said, I'm leaving you. His face crumpled. Sarah, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can. You let your family blame me for our daughter's death while you sued the doctor for following your instructions. There's no coming back from that. Where will you go? I'll figure it out. David was crying now, but they weren't tears of grief or remorse. They were tears of panic, of a man watching his carefully constructed lies fall apart. The lawsuit. Drop it, David. Drop it. Tell your mother the truth, and maybe you can salvage some tiny piece of your soul. But I could see in his eyes that he wouldn't. The lawsuit had become more important to him than his daughter's memory, more important than his wife, more important than the truth. I went upstairs and started packing. 3 days later, I got a call from Margaret. She'd heard from David that I was having a breakdown and wanted to stage an intervention. Sarah, dear, she said in that condescending tone I'd learned to hate. David told me you're talking about leaving. This is exactly the kind of irrational behavior we've been worried about. Is it irrational to leave a husband who's been lying to me for 6 months? David hasn't been lying, sweetie. He's been trying to protect you from difficult truths. What difficult truths, Margaret? That your behavior during the pregnancy contributed to what happened. That your emotional instability made it harder for the medical team to do their job properly. I took a deep breath. Margaret, would you be willing to meet with me? You and David's father and David? I have some things I'd like to share with all of you. Of course, dear. We've been hoping you'd be open to family guidance. We arranged to meet at David and my house the next evening. I also invited my sister Jenny and my parents, though I didn't tell Margaret they were coming. The next evening, David's family arrived right on time. Margaret was carrying a Bible and what looked like pamphlets about grief counseling through prayer. David's father carried a folder that probably contained information about Christian mental health resources. David looked terrible. He hadn't been sleeping, and he kept glancing at me nervously, like I might explode at any moment. Sarah, Margaret began, settling into our living room like she owned the place, we're here because we love you and we're concerned about the path you're going down. What path is that? This anger, this resentment, this refusal to accept God's will. David told us you've been filling your head with conspiracy theories about the medical care, and now you're talking about abandoning your marriage during your time of greatest need. David's father nodded gravely. Sometimes grief can make us paranoid, Sarah. We start looking for someone to blame instead of accepting that some things are just God's mysterious plan. I looked at David, who was staring at his hands. Did you tell them about Dr. Martinez's recordings? David's head snapped up. Sarah, please. What recordings? Margaret asked. That's when the doorbell rang. Jenny, my parents, and, to everyone's surprise, Dr. Martinez himself walked into the room. Margaret immediately stood up. What is this? David, what's going on? Sit down, Margaret, I said calmly. Dr. Martinez has some things to share with all of you. Dr. Martinez looked nervous but determined. He was carrying the same folder he'd shown me, plus a portable recording device. Mrs. Henderson, he said to Margaret, I understand you've been telling people that your daughter-in-law was responsible for her baby's death because God was punishing her. Margaret lifted her chin defiantly. I believe God doesn't take babies from faithful women without reason. And I believe you have a right to know what actually happened in the operating room that day. Dr. Martinez set up his recording device on the coffee table. This is a conversation I had with your son when Sarah came in with placental abruption. He pressed play. The room filled with David's voice explaining that his wife was careless with money and asking for the cheapest option. Margaret's voice telling David that God's will cannot be changed by expensive procedures. David choosing the conservative approach against Dr. Martinez's strong medical advice. As the recording played, Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally horror. When it ended, the room was silent. David, Margaret whispered, is this real? David couldn't look at her. Mom, you have to understand the insurance. You chose the cheaper option? You told me to. You said God's will couldn't be changed by expensive procedures. Margaret stared at her son like she'd never seen him before. I thought the doctor was recommending the less expensive option. I thought we were just agreeing with his medical advice. No, Dr. Martinez said quietly. I strongly advise the immediate, more expensive surgery. Your son chose otherwise. David's father spoke up. But the lawsuit, David. You told us the doctor made the wrong choice. Because I can't admit that I made the wrong choice. David exploded. Don't you see? If I admit that I chose the option that killed Emma, everyone will hate me. Mom will hate me. You'll hate me. The whole church will know that I killed my own daughter to save money. The room erupted. Margaret started crying, real tears this time, not the controlled tears of someone making a point. David's father was staring at his son like he didn't recognize him. So you let everyone blame Sarah, my father demanded, speaking for the first time since he'd arrived. I thought it would be easier if everyone just believed it was God's will, David said miserably. Easier for who? Jenny asked. David couldn't answer. Dr. Martinez pulled out more documents. There's something else you all need to know. David has been actively pursuing a lawsuit against me and the hospital, claiming that I recommended the conservative approach. He's seeking substantial financial damages. Margaret looked like she might be sick. David, you're suing the doctor? While letting us blame Sarah. Mom, the lawyer says we can win. Win what? Money from your baby's death. It's not about money. Then what is it about? Margaret was standing now, her voice rising. Because it's not about justice. It's not about truth. What is it about, David? David was crying now, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. I don't know. I don't know anymore. It just got so complicated, and the lawyer said we could make them pay for what happened, and I thought maybe if we got money from it, Emma's death would mean something. Emma's death meant something because she was your daughter. Margaret screamed. Not because you could profit from it. She turned to me, her face streaked with tears. Sarah, I am so sorry. I thought God was teaching us something. I thought maybe you had done something wrong. Maybe your faith wasn't strong enough. Maybe. She collapsed back into her chair. I was trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. I was trying to find a reason when there wasn't a reason. Except there was a reason, I said quietly. Your son chose money over Emma's life. The room went silent again. Margaret looked at David with an expression I'd never seen before, complete disappointment mixed with horror. You let me blame Sarah for 6 months. You let me tell the whole church that she was being punished by God. You let me destroy her reputation, her relationships, her faith. Mom! While you knew the truth the whole time. David nodded miserably. Margaret stood up, walked across the room, and slapped her son across the face. You are not the man I raised, she said. You are not the man I thought you were. And you are certainly not the man Sarah deserved. She turned to me. Sarah, I don't know how to apologize for what I've put you through. I don't know how to take back 6 months of blame and judgment and cruelty. I thought I was serving God, but I was serving my own need to make sense of tragedy. And David was serving his need to avoid responsibility, my sister Jenny added. Margaret nodded. Yes, we both failed you. We both failed Emma's memory. But David, she looked at her son with disgust. David did something I can't forgive. David's father spoke up. Son, you need to drop this lawsuit. Today. Dad, the lawyer says. I don't care what the lawyer says. You lied to us. You lied to your wife. You lied to yourself. And now you're lying to the courts. This ends now. David looked around the room at all of us. His parents, my family, Dr. Martinez, me. He was looking for someone to support him, someone to tell him his lies were justified. He found no one. The next Sunday, Margaret stood up in front of the entire congregation at morning service. She asked for the microphone, which confused the pastor, but he handed it over. I need to make a public apology, she said, her voice shaking. 6 months ago, my family lost a precious baby girl named Emma. In my grief and confusion, I said terrible things about Emma's mother, my daughter-in-law Sarah. I accused her of causing Emma's death through sin or lack of faith. I spread these lies throughout our community, and many of you believed them because you trusted my judgment. The church was dead silent. I was wrong. Completely, horribly wrong. Sarah did nothing to cause Emma's death. She was a loving mother who lost her baby due to medical complications that were beyond anyone's control. Margaret's voice broke. But there's more. My son David chose to prioritize financial concerns over medical advice that could have saved Emma's life. While I was blaming Sarah for Emma's death, David knew the truth, that his own decisions had contributed to the tragedy. Gasps echoed through the church. People were turning to look at each other, processing this revelation. I am asking for your forgiveness for spreading lies about an innocent woman during the worst period of her life. But more importantly, I am asking you to reach out to Sarah, to apologize for any judgment you may have passed, and to support her as she grieves the loss of her daughter. Margaret handed the microphone back to the pastor and walked out of the church. David's father followed her. David wasn't there. He'd stopped coming to church weeks ago, once the insurance investigation became public knowledge. Within hours, my phone was ringing constantly. Church members calling to apologize, friends who had distanced themselves asking for forgiveness, neighbors who had been cold to me for months suddenly wanting to bring casseroles and flowers. It was overwhelming but also healing. For the first time in 6 months, I felt like I could breathe in my own community. David dropped the lawsuit the day after his mother's public confession. His lawyer was furious. Apparently they'd been close to a settlement, but David finally understood that the truth was going to come out whether he wanted it to or not. The insurance company closed their investigation, noting that David's false claims constituted potential fraud, but that they wouldn't pursue charges since the case had been voluntarily withdrawn. Dr. Martinez called me to let me know the resolution. Sarah, he said, I want you to know that none of this was your fault. Not Emma's death, not the aftermath, none of it. I know that now, I said. Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth. I should have told it sooner. You told it when it mattered most. David moved out of our house 2 weeks later. He'd been fired from his job when news of the fraudulent lawsuit became public, apparently attempting to profit from a baby's death while falsely accusing medical professionals didn't sit well with his corporate employers. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. David didn't contest anything. He signed over his share of the house, agreed to split our remaining assets fairly, and didn't ask for alimony. I think he was just grateful I wasn't pursuing charges for fraud or defamation. Margaret called me before David left town. Sarah, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know Emma was loved. David loved her. I loved her. We all loved her. David's choices don't change that. I know, I said. And Margaret, I forgive you. She started crying. How can you forgive me after what I put you through? Because you were grieving too. You made a mistake in how you processed that grief, but your heart was broken just like mine was. David's choices were calculated and selfish. Yours were misguided but came from love. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than you know. It's been a year now since Dr. Martinez made that phone call that changed everything. A year since I learned the truth about Emma's death and David's betrayal. I still live in the same house, though I've redecorated it completely. Emma's nursery is now a bright office where I've started doing freelance graphic design. I kept a few special items from her room: the teddy bear we bought together, the hand-knitted blanket my mother made, the book of lullabies I used to read to my belly when she was growing inside me. I see Dr. Chun, my therapist, once a month now instead of every week. She's helped me understand that my grief is normal, that my anger was justified, and that learning to trust again will take time. Margaret and I have developed an unlikely friendship. She calls me every few weeks, and we've had dinner together several times. She's become an advocate for other women in the church who are facing pregnancy complications or infant loss, making sure no one else gets blamed for medical tragedies beyond their control. David's father visits sometimes, too. He's devastated by his son's choices, but has worked hard to maintain a relationship with me. "You're still family," he tells me. "Emma was our granddaughter, and you were her mother. That doesn't change just because David lost his way." I haven't heard from David since he moved out. Margaret tells me he's living in another state, working odd jobs, still struggling with the consequences of his choices. Part of me feels sorry for him. He lost Emma too, and then he lost everything else through his own actions. But mostly I feel nothing toward him, which I think is healthier than the anger I used to carry. The church community has embraced me in ways I never expected. The same people who whispered about me at Emma's funeral now include me in their prayers, their dinners, their lives. Some relationships will never be the same, but many have become deeper because of what we've all learned about grace and forgiveness, and the danger of judging others in their darkest moments. I've started a support group for women who have experienced pregnancy loss. We meet twice a month at the church, and Dr. Martinez sometimes comes as a guest speaker to help families understand the medical realities of high-risk pregnancies. Our motto is "Grief is not punishment," a reminder that terrible things sometimes happen to good people, and that's not a reflection of their worth or their faith. I still miss Emma every single day. I still wonder what she would have looked like, what her laugh would have sounded like, what kind of person she would have become. But now I can grieve her properly, without the crushing weight of believing I somehow caused her death. People ask me if I ever want to have another baby, maybe with someone new someday. The answer is complicated. I'm not sure I'm ready to trust someone with that kind of vulnerability again. But I'm not close to the possibility either. What I know for certain is that Emma's life mattered, not because of the money David tried to make from her death, but because she was wanted and loved and celebrated during the time she was with us. She kicked and hiccuped and responded to music. She had tiny fingernails, and her father's nose, and her mother's stubborn streak that made her breach presentation. She was real, she was loved, and she was not taken from us as punishment for anyone's sins. If David had chosen differently that day, if he had listened to Dr. Martinez's medical advice instead of his mother's financial concerns, if he had prioritized Emma's life over insurance coverage, would she be alive today? The doctors say probably yes. That's a truth I have to live with, but it's not a truth that destroys me anymore. Because the other truth is this: I did everything right. I took my vitamins, went to my appointments, followed medical advice, prepared for her arrival with joy and anticipation. When complications arose, I got to the hospital as quickly as I could. The choices that cost Emma her life were not mine to make. I was unconscious when they were made. For 6 months, David's family convinced me that I was a bad mother before Emma was even born. They made me believe that my grief was selfish, that my anger was sinful, that my questions were faithless. They isolated me from my community and made me doubt my own memories and experiences. But Emma knew the truth, even if she couldn't tell it. For 36 weeks, she grew inside a mother who loved her completely. She felt my hands on my belly when she moved. She heard me singing to her, reading to her, talking to her about all the things we would do together. She knew she was wanted. That's the legacy I choose to focus on now. Not the betrayal, not the lies, not the months of misplaced blame. Emma was loved from the moment I learned she existed until the moment I had to let her go, and she's loved still. The truth didn't bring her back, but it set me free to grieve her properly and to honor her memory without shame. And sometimes, that's the only justice we can find in this world, the justice of truth itself, even when it comes too late to change what happened. But it's never too late to change what happens next. If this story touched you and you've experienced pregnancy loss, please know that you are not alone and it was not your fault. Subscribe for more stories of truth and healing, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Together, we can break the silence around grief and ensure that no mother ever has to carry the weight of misplaced blame during her darkest hour.